All right, Deputy Murphy, 25 minutes, please.
And thank you, Mr. O'Connell. You're very welcome. Could you just give the committee an understanding, Mr. O'Connell, of how senior you were in the central bank?
I was, my rank was Assistant Director General, and so from the top down you'd have the Governor, you'd be the Director General and Deputy Director General, so the top three, and then there were 4 or 5 of us at about at the Assistant Director General level, dealing with maybe markets, the currency centre, and economics and so on.
Who did you report directly to?
Probably it would have been both the Director General and the Governor.
Okay, so you were quite senior in the central bank.
Yeah, so it was sort of loose, you know. I mean, we were all in this. I heard you talking about the famous 7th floor. We were all on the 7th floor, so we'd be interacting quite a lot. So it was sort of informal, you know. You didn't have to wait for. Although sometimes I think it has to be said, all right, that if say a board paper bypassed somebody and went to the Governor, there would have been a bit of irritation about it that the hierarchical system wasn't followed.
But you weren't in the board. Were you still privy to board papers, though?
I would get quite a few board papers, yeah, and maybe the minutes. Sometimes those that are only relevant to me. I certainly would have got no regulatory papers.
To what end would these minutes or these reports have come to you? For comment? For agreement?
No, just for information, really. You know,
okay.
Information. Yeah.
And then when it came to kind of to drafting or signing off key external communications from the bank, a financial stability report, a pre-budget letter, were you central to those, to the preparation and signing off of those documents?
Yes, I would have been heavily involved in those, yeah.
Okay, so if someone wanted to make a change to something that you had drafted, would that have to come back to you for approval? The final wording of a document have to come back to you for approval?
Well, I mean, the convention was, if a draft paper were sent up the line, say the draft financial stability report went up the line and somebody deleted something or watered it down or whatever, and that was taken as, you know, they were superior, they were more senior to us, so we accepted that. Now, maybe you could argue the toss sometimes and say, well, I don't think it's right to delete that or whatever, but generally speaking, what they wanted went, you know.
Okay, and in terms then, if you look at something like a financial stability report and the engagement between the central bank and the regulator on preparing those reports, after 2004, from previous evidence we've heard, the responsibility fell more to the central bank. Why was that?
Well, I suppose financial stability issues generally are more of an economic nature rather than a purely micro-regulatory nature. But prior to 2004, the regulatory people did have an economist or two whose part of his duties were to liaise with the Financial Stability Department and have an input into the stability report. Subsequently, the Financial Stability Department would be liaising with the regulator about information or data or that sort of thing, but they weren't really actively involved beyond that point, you know.
I'd say then when it comes to the 2007 Financial Stability Report that the central bank is the key player in drafting that report.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And are you key in the central bank to drafting that report?
Well, it would be myself and the head of the Financial Stability Department. And in fact, the head of the Financial Stability Department, although he had the title Senior Advisor, he was on the same salary as me. So, in fact, he often, in practice, dealt with the Director General, who was the chair of the Financial Stability Committee. So, but I would have had a lot of sort of lateral contact with the head of the Financial Stability Department, and you know we've worked in the bank,
okay,
and written papers for a long time together, and so on.
Okay, well, looking at the 2007 report, house prices are beginning to fall, but the 2007 Stability Report favours a soft landing scenario over a hard landing. Why?
Nobody can say whether it's going to be soft or hard. In fact, it's pretty common for asset price adjustments, particularly in stock markets, you know, whatever currency, for or commodity markets, to get abrupt drops. In fact, quite often you'll get an overshooting downwards. Now, housing market will be sort of maybe you get a slower adjustment, if you like, but you probably can't. You can never say ab initio. I think it's more hope than confidence if you talk about soft landings. But if sentiment sort of decreases monotonically or gradually, you might get a gradual fall. But you certainly couldn't rule out. I mean, for example, the instances in Sweden, Finland, Japan, the savings and loans in the States, they were pretty precipitous falls, So I suppose the central bank had to come down on one side or the other. Was there going to be could we say there was going to be a hard landing? Well, for starters, you wouldn't know ex ante is it going to be soft or hard. But in general, I suppose all central banks would tend to, more hope than confidence, say we'd hope for a soft landing rather than a hard landing.
Hearing Mr. O'Connell, analysis behind how you answered that question, but Professor Honan in his report stated there was no analytical evidence provided in support of this key conclusion. That's on page 84 of his report. So how was it reached?
There wouldn't have been, in my view. I mean, there's no way you could figure out ex ante, analytically, whether it was going to be soft or hard.
Reached. How do you then decide?
Well, I guess
this language?
Yeah. I mean, from my recollection, property prices peaked in February 2007. House prices here, and we were seeing a gradual fall, I guess. The stability report came out probably in November 2007. So you were seeing a sort of a gradual fall away, and it was probably an extrapolation of that. But there would have been, to my knowledge, no analytical or no high-powered analysis to prove that, of the binomial possibilities that it was going to be a soft rather than a hard landing. Now, I mean, you could possibly extrapolate from the peak property price period in February 2007, given that up through autumn there had been gradual falls. But, if something was going to hit the system, people like the buy-to-let investors and so on might have had to get out quickly,
This again,
yeah.
sorry. You say in your opening statement, talking about the financial stability reports, that the overall assessment and tone, which reflected the views of the two boards, tended to be reassuring. And you imply that this was in contrast to the main body of the financial stability reports, which you would have drafted. So what are you saying there? Did that language come from the board?
Yeah, well, in essence, I'm saying that the editorial in the financial stability report, I mean, they would have had a day-long consideration of the body of the report, all the details, data, and so on, and they would form their views, and that would be embodied in the editorial, sort of. So I always felt there was a potential disconnect, if you like, between the body of the report, the technical analysis, and the overview.
And did you object at the time?
Did I object? Maybe not, because I probably knew that what the board says goes,
Okay.
I mean, I may have interpolated at the day-long session, possibly, all right, say, that's a very serious situation, and can we have a more benign view in the editorial? But I have to be honest, I probably didn't object as much as I should have done.
You mentioned in your opening statement that it was a question of tone, and you just said editorial. But Honan also notes in his report on page 83, in relation to the estimates of house price overvaluations that had appeared in financial stability reports, results of models estimating overvaluation were presented in successive financial stability reports up to and including that for 2006. But by contrast, it's on page 83 of the Honan report, the 2007 financial stability report is notable for the absence of any updating of the calculations reported earlier. In particular, there was no update of the McQuinn-O'Reilly 2006 model. However, an internal staff updating of this model undertaken in April 2008, after publication of the 2007 report, indicated that house price overvaluation was estimated to have reached almost 35% by mid-2007. In your opening statement, you stated that a deliberate decision was taken in preparing the 2007 Financial Stability Report to delete the conclusions of a research study updating the extent of the overvaluation of Irish property prices. So, first of all, was the 2006 McQuinn-O'Reilly model updated in advance of the 2007 Financial Stability Report?
Yeah, my recollection is that it would have been, because, if you like, the format of the... obviously, the question of overvaluation was a very topical issue, which would have been looked at, or should have been looked at, and it certainly would have been done. And I'm sure I would stand to be corrected on this, but I would imagine the draft financial stability report probably had that update in it, but it was taken out.
That's probably the research study then that was deleted from the 2007 Financial Stability Report.
Yeah.
So who made the decision to delete it?
Can I name names?
No, okay. But you can't tell us at what level it was made. Was it made?
It was made at a level above mine.
Was it made at the board?
No, I think below the board.
Below the board,
Yeah.
at a level above yours?
Yes.
Okay, someone you reported to?
Pardon me?
Someone you reported to?
Yes.
Why was that decision made?
Well, I can only assume that they were afraid of frightening the horses. You know,
Challenges.
even though in actual fact 35% was an underestimate in my view. In fact, Honan, as you probably know, had some econometric issues about the McQueen O'Reilly approach, and I would have had too. But no, I guess that there probably was a view that if you put this in, and the estimated overvaluation, even though it's on the low side, in my view, of 35%, could have spooked the horses.
Challenges exclusion.
I can't remember whether I did or not, but I mean, by implication, the draft going up the line would have included it. So I would have wanted it to be in, but it was taken out.
But could a soft landing scenario still have been put forward in the 2007 stability report if the research had been included?
Well, I don't think that research would have been conclusive one way or the other. You'll probably know from both Nyberg and Honan and so on that you won't get anything terribly definitive. In fact, you may recollect, go back to Greenspan. Greenspan famously or infamously said, "I can never know whether there's a bubble there or not, but what I'll do is I'll pick up the pieces after the bubble." So that's not a very wise thing to do. But the 35% estimate would have been an underestimate in my view, and in the event, of course, it was very much an underestimate.
Concluded that research in 2007 report and still concluded in favour of a soft landing over a hard landing.
I think you still could have done, yeah, but again, it's more. You could say it's a bit of wishful thinking. Nobody can say ex ante whether it's going to be a soft or a hard landing. When the stability report came out in November 2007, that was 8 or 9 months since the peak of the property market. So there'd been a sort of a gradual decline, and maybe extrapolating that, the hope was that that would continue and they wouldn't have a complete collapse.
On the language, because it was very important in the scheme of things, because it had an impact on the public in terms of their awareness to the actual challenges the economy were facing. Soft landing was reassuring.
Yeah, although I wouldn't attach too much significance to a soft landing. I mean, I think in that third paragraph of the Financial Stability Report, which both Donald Donovan and Professor Goreski put to me, I think it was sort of said that the risks are increasing, but they're manageable. It means the same thing. If they're manageable, I mean, we're looking at a soft landing. But I wouldn't attach too much significance to the particular words that were used. And in a way, I mean, any central bank probably had to sort of say, well, it'll be all right on the night, or words to that effect,
You're agreeing with then the overall tone and assessment of the 2007 Financial Stability Report?
No, I personally wouldn't have agreed with it. No, because the body of the report was pointing all in the wrong directions. In fact, I used to say,
just because I'm confused, because you seem to be saying that it was probably necessary to present such a rather hopeful overall assessment in public, since the central bank had hardly concluded that banks were about to collapse. So, are you agreeing with that report and how those decisions were reached?
No, well, back as early as 2001, 2002, my view was that things were going crazy, and we had a massive bubble in the system. So, I mean, what sort of if you go back to the Stability Report in 2007, you had the body of the report, all indicators pointing in the wrong direction, and then you have an overall assessment of what's happening. I mean, if I was asked to do an objective assessment, objective overview on the basis of the indicators, I would be inclined to say, yeah, we're headed for big trouble. But a central bank, being a central bank, can't really say that. It has to sort of pull its punches, really.
Okay. So the central bank then did the job it was meant to do.
Pardon me?
The central bank did the job it was meant to do with those financial stability reports.
I'm sorry, I can't quite.
The central bank did the job that it was meant to do.
Yeah, but I mean, you see, central bank. In fact, I should have said when Donovan and Goreski asked me about that, put that paragraph to me. I sort of said, they said to me, "Isn't that very complacent?" I said, "No, that's central bank speak, and it's negative. In fact, you probably know loads of people have made a good living out of parsing the words of Greenspan or Bernanke or Mervyn King or whatever. If they alter their statement from one month to the next. So in central bank speak, in my view, the overall assessment was probably quite negative, even if it had used the word soft landing and things are manageable and so on. But if you read between the lines, as people who were familiar with central bank speak would do or would want to do, you could see that was pretty negative,
Okay, so it'd be your view, excuse me, that no one was reading between the lines.
Experts would be, because in fact, outsiders. I mean, prior to that, back a couple of years before that, we would have occasionally very large investors coming to Ireland and thinking about investing in bank shares. And I remember there was I think it was the second largest pension fund in the world from Holland came over. We wouldn't normally meet them, but I was told, since they're so important, you go and meet them. Now, these guys in 2005 were utterly and totally sceptical of Irish bank shares. But, I mean, I had to sit there in front of them and sort of say, well, yeah, there are problems over there, all right. In the event they didn't invest. But, I mean, people in the know were clear that things were problematic. And, they'd be the people who'd be reading central bank speak, and they would have seen that third paragraph in the FSR 2007 as being a negative message rather than a positive one, in my view.
I want to just come back to something that you said in relation to the board, to try and get a better understanding of what was happening there. You mentioned in your opening statement political and property interests on the bank's board making it difficult to get certain views through. But earlier you also said that contrarian views didn't drift up to the board. So, which is it?
No, contrarian, I wouldn't call them contrarian views, but they were sort of realistic views. Yeah, I mentioned that example of the need for more zoning of land, which was a crying need at the time. I mean, as I said, these guys had cornered the market in zoned land in North Dublin. In fact, there's another case, it arose in Waterford, Dungarvan, I think. I mean, it mattered greatly where on the map the line for rezoning was. So when I put that up, because you had to increase housing supply, particularly in the Greater Dublin area, and you weren't going to do that unless you had more land zoned. So when I put a very tentative point in the comment, which is the editorial for the bulletin, to push it up the line, say we need to consider more zoning or whatever, or some very milk and watery language, that was deleted. It didn't go beyond. It didn't get to the board.
Get to the board.
No.
So what do you mean when you talk about political and property interests on the bank's board making it difficult to get certain views through? Is someone mindful of who's on the board and so they're keeping things from getting through?
Yeah. It's the intermediate person between me and the board.
Between you and the board.
Who blocked it. And, I mean, as you know, land zoning and so on is a very contentious issue. People can make fortunes out of it, or not, as the case may be. And it didn't go beyond the person to whom I was reporting. No.
Okay. So was that person then protecting members of the board from a potential conflict, or was he protecting them from having to consider information that would conflict them? I mean, why protect them?
No, my interpretation would be that if you get into the issue of zoning of land and so on, that is a very controversial area, because, I mean, I was going to say, down in Dungarvan, there was a criminal case there where somebody was up for corrupt planning, and the county manager, in the course of the trial, said that if you zoned a particular piece of agricultural land, that would have increased in value tenfold. So, the zoning of land, as you blokes probably know very well, more than I do, county council and so on, is a very contentious issue. But the point, I mean, the economic point is that one needed to increase housing supply, and therefore more zoned land had to be brought on stream. And I was trying to hint at that in my draft comment, which never went beyond that.
Mr. O'Connell, in your view, is your intermediary acting appropriately by not bringing that to the board?
Well, I thought, suppressing what I saw as an economic argument wasn't a good thing,
You also state that the large exposure of the banks to individual developers was rigorously concealed from your level in the bank. Concealed on purpose, I suppose. Well,
no, it was a question of secrecy, you don't leave these things lying around the place. No more than, for example, my colleague on the 7th floor dealing with liquidity to the banks. Every day they'd have a table about the provision of liquidity to the banks, the collateral the banks had, how much more they could borrow over the next few months and so on. You didn't leave that lying around the place. I was shown at the odd time, but it was never actually physically given to me. I might have perused it over somebody's shoulder or being asked to look at something like that. But so not seeing the large exposures, it was sort of part of the course. I didn't need to know, but because we knew anyway that total bank lending was going crazy.
Being kept from you, this information.
I don't think I probably needed it, but I mean...
I'm sorry, but you said it was rigorously concealed from your level in the bank, and you used the word secrecy, so was it deliberately kept from you?
Well, I don't mean in a pejorative sense, it was just that if you didn't need to have see the data, it wasn't provided to you.
I'm going to take issue on that expression, rigorously concealed, because that intimates an intention, an act, a motivation to keep information from you.
Well, maybe it's not the best choice of words by me, but it probably wasn't necessary. I would know from the press anyway, these guys who were developing places around the city and so on, they had to be borrowing massive amounts, but I wouldn't have known definitively. But of course I'd know individual banks' lending was increasing massively, and the aggregate lending was increasing massively to the property sector, yeah.
Okay. You talk about the intermediary that you would report to keeping information from the board.
Well, that item didn't go forward.
Okay. In zoning, you said keeping information.
Yeah.
So when the board made decisions, when it agreed editorial on financial stability reports, when it drafted pre-budget letters, was it making those decisions with the full information?
Well, those guys were pretty smart, some of them were in the property sector themselves. They were business people, and others. Had they got the full information? I'm not sure. But I mean, the drafts or papers, if you like, were filtered through to the board, and it was up to the top people in the central bank to decide what went or what didn't go.
A contention that key facts were intentionally kept from the board of the central bank.
Well, I thought that point about the zoning was an important point. I mean, it's not an issue where there's any impropriety involved or anything like that, in my view, but it's just a common sense economic point that housing supply had to increase, and in order to do that, you needed more zoned land.
What about then memos that you would have written about reining in lending to the property sector, which you referenced in your opening statement, by imposing credit ceilings? And the memo came back with the words, "That is out of the question," added to the memo. Why did that happen, do you think, and was that information brought to the board?
No, that was a note that went to the governor, and yeah, as I said, the governor initially had said we'll have to consider bringing this issue to the board, as to whether we restrict the banks in their lending. But the point you mentioned, that is out of the question, seems to have overridden that. So that item would not have gone to the board, I think, by definition.
And just to clarify again, would the board have been aware of that model that was in the first draft of the Financial Stability Report of 2007 on overvaluations of house prices, Irish property prices, that was then dropped out? They wouldn't have been aware of that.
No,
okay, so that was also kept from them.
Yeah.
When it came to then the drafting of the pre-budget letters, these letters that went, were you involved in the initial drafting?
Yes, I would have been. I would have overseen it, or put some pointers to the chaps who might draw it up.
But you wouldn't be involved in final sign-off of those?
Well, I mean, the governor would have the final say in that. For example, if he didn't like the tone of the draft that was sent to him, he'd alter it, he'd come back to us, and he'd have the final say. Yeah.
The governor or the board had the final say on the pre-budget letters?
The governor would generally show it to the board, so they would have an input into it. Yes.
Okay. And so with those same vested interests, those same things that were happening that we just discussed about, would they have also been in play with the submission or the drafting of pre-budget letters in terms of information being kept from the board?
Well, I don't think that would have arisen with the pre-budget letter. Most things would have been on the table. Now, I can recollect in the past, though having said that from the economics department, we might have suggested maybe some tax change or whatever, but that would typically have been that wouldn't run, because the view in the bank was that taxation was a matter for government, and we don't sort of suggest that they tax X and subsidise Y. So there would be general economic issues talking about the stance of upcoming fiscal policy in the budget recommendation. Maybe bank lending property prices would have figured quite strongly, I think, too. Yeah.
Okay, so that's an example of information not going to the board, but not because of a conflict of interest or potential one, or an intermediary stepping in the way, but because it wasn't what the central bank did. Is that correct? You didn't give advice on taxation issues. Is that what you're saying?
No, yeah. No, I think I can recollect way back in the past we probably did. We put something in about maybe something that should be taxed, let's say, for environmental reasons or something like that. But the view was that it's not for us to say what taxes should go up or taxes down. It's really for a government.
And did you ever disagree yourself with any of the pre-budget letters that were sent to the Minister between 2002 and 2008?
No, I think I would have been in general agreement with those, because we would have drafted the approach, and the approach generally wouldn't have been massively altered by the governor or the board for the most part.
Did you ever write to the board yourself, expressing concern about information being kept from them by the person you reported to?
No, I didn't. No.
And then when we come to the 2004 pre-budget letter, it's noted by the board after the budget that the advice from the central bank was not fully adhered to. In that scenario, what does the central bank do? Does it write a post-budget letter? Does it note this in its financial stability report?
No, I mean, I think the view is that the bank or the governor is giving advice to the government, best advice as he sees it, and the government is the final arbiter in these things. They can decide to not to accept that advice. I mean, it would be fairly common. Bank of England might be recommending to the British government same thing, or the Fed in the States. It would be fairly common.
And my final question: so the failure to pursue post-budget announcement what hadn't been adopted by the central bank pre-budget, did that have anything to do with the membership of the board of the central bank, or vested interests, as you described them, operating within the bank?
Well, I could only surmise about that. A lot of people on the board had strong political affiliations, as you're probably aware. It'd be logical for them to put their preferences to their political friends, I suppose, from time to time.
To go there, and I just got wrapped out.